I just can't tell you how blessed I feel to have been able to live in Dixie around all these wonderful, good people. And the best this life has to offer, I know I have had.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a podcast brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation and hosted by noted writer Lyman Hafen, who has chronicled the stories, culture, and character of Utah's Dixie for more than 40 years.
This is a great day in Utah's Dixie for me to get to sit down with Laree Jones, one of the most wonderful, delightful, important women in our community over the last few decades. I don't know how best to put that, but for a long time. Laree she's a Dixie girl, and we're going to learn more about her story here. And she would have to be considered the mother of the century in St. George, the family that she raised. Her husband, Heber Jones, a legendary teacher at Woodward, someone that I remember so well and someone who had such an impact on my life and my appreciation of history and learning. Laree, what would be fun today, I think, is for us to talk about how it is that you became this Dixie girl. I know you just celebrated your Dixie High School, was it 70th?
Our 70th high school.
How is it that you became a Dixie girl?
It's an interesting story. I was born in Kanab, Utah, and we moved to Salt Lake City when I was 4 years old. And so I went to school in Salt Lake until I became 14. And then part of my family split at that time. My mother took myself and my 3 younger sisters to her hometown, which was Paragouna, and my father kept my older brother, and my sister was in nurse's training, and another one was married. So anyway, it split us. But Paragouna was a wonderful place. It was such a change because we had no vehicle, we had no indoor plumbing. We had one tap next to the wooden coal stove in the kitchen, and that was it. And that year that I was there, the kids were just so good to me. The kids of Paragouna and of Parowan High School were great. I went to Parowan High School my 9th grade year, and I was in the Richards field house a lot and didn't even realize that it was named after Alma Richards until I just saw the movie Alma Richards, and it just all came to fruition. That's why we called it Richards Field House. But anyway, that was a fun year for me. My sister graduated from nurse's training after that year, and she applied for a position at the new Dixie Pioneer Memorial Hospital and also at Cedar City in their hospital. But Dixie Pioneer Memorial Hospital let her know immediately that she was wanted there. And so she said, I'm going to go to St. George. Why don't you just all leave Paragouna and come to St. George? And so we did. And I was in 10th grade, so that put me as the big person, a senior at Woodward. And that was a really interesting and fun year for me. And I've always felt really indebted to my class because they were so nice to me and welcomed me in and greeted me so warmly. And I had a number of friendships, and it was a great experience. But I tell my classmates all of the time that they blessed my life, because at age 15, when I was here, I could have transitioned so many ways, and they kept me going the right way.
And those classmates that remain with us, you met with them just a couple of weeks ago.
We did.
70 years after your graduation. What does that mean to come back together like that?
We are together all the time. This is an interesting thing. We had regular class reunions from the time we graduated from high school, about every 10 years, and sometimes every 5 years. We were in Pine Valley at our 45th class reunion. And all of a sudden, I can't remember who it was, stood up and said, "We would like to ask Laree Jones if she would be our 50-year class reunion chairman." And I turned to my husband and I said, "No way." And he jabbed me in the ribs. And he said, "Well, of course you're going to do that." And so I said, "Will you help me?" And he said, "Well, of course I'll help you. You stand right up there and say you're going to do it." And so I just followed my husband's lead, and I stood up and said, "All right, I'll do this, but I want everyone to help." And, of course, you know how that went. "Oh, you bet we'll help. Yeah, we'll be there." So 2 years before our 50th class reunion, I started calling the girl classmates, just the females, and asked them if they'd like to go to lunch, and why don't they search and find some old pictures of school that we could look at. And so we started meeting on a monthly basis for lunch. It was so fun. And so many at that time had moved back to St. George because 50 years their spouses had retired and had roots here, and so they were coming back. And it was just, we really had a good time. And we had so many pictures. We had one whole room where we had a wall of pictures. I kid you not. On all 4 walls we had just pictures. So we collected a lot of pictures and had a lot of fun, and we had tons of help. What we did to draw the males in is that once a year we would have a big barbecue, and we'd invite the men to come with their spouses, and the females would bring their spouses and would barbecue, and then we'd talk to the men and would tell them what the girls had decided we were going to do. And if they liked it or not, they needed to let us know because it was their reunion too. So it worked out really well. And what we did, the locals, we hoped that we had given them enough information that they could spread it around and pass it on. And then we started sending notices out a year in advance, letting everyone know what it would be, when it would be. We had a 2-day, 50-year class reunion that I thought was simply to die for. It was so fun.
If Laree Jones was in charge of it, it was the best ever, I'm sure. Tell me about that spirit that you felt when you came here and became part of that class, and how that has perpetuated through the years. What is it tied to?
I think it's tied to the goodness of the people and the sincerity of the people and the desires of the people. They all wanted to be good people. They all wanted to be fine examples, and they all wanted their children to excel and to have more than they had on a material basis, but more opportunities as well. And I think that's what encompasses the Dixie spirit. We have such a great heritage. And our ancestors worked so hard, and they gave us so much that we wanted to pass it on. And that's the Dixie spirit.
And I think that so much of that spirit is perpetuated through education, through our teachers. When I talk to people about their memories of this area, they always harken back to their teachers, to what their teachers meant to them and how special they were. And that's who you became, is one of those special teachers that generations now look back to and remember you as perpetuating that spirit. Also, your late husband, Heber, who was such a legendary figure as a teacher in our community. And maybe you could just share with us how you and he came together, and also how it is that you became a family that were educators.
I met Heber in a very strange situation. I was working at Church's Drive-In, and I got a call from a Tom MacArthur.
Tell us where Churches was. We need to set that up geographically.
Churches started on the boulevard, and it was Kinko's, Washington County News, O.P. Skaggs, and Churches. And then he had enough money making those Churches sandwiches on the boulevard and selling things that he built between St. George and Santa Clara, out on a hill, halfway. And so he ran that.
I remember it as out in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
When you came around the point of the Black Hill from St. George headed to Santa Clara, it was just desert all across there. But up on that little knoll, there was a restaurant.
And that was Churches.
And you were a waitress there.
I was a car hop. So I was car hopping, and Mr. Church was very interesting because he knew we didn't have a car. And so he would come in, and he wouldn't call. He'd just say, "Can you be ready to go to work at such and such a time?" And so I would get ready, and he would take me out, and then he would bring me back. And he did that with a number of people. So we were just all on the car together, and that was our shift, and we were going out, and then we were coming back. But we never had definite hours. Now you work certain days of the week, and you work certain times of the day. That just wasn't church. That wasn't what he did. So anyway, it was really quite confusing. But Tom MacArthur said, "May I come and visit you?" And so I said yes. And so he came down in his Hawaiian shirt, and he said he owned a jewelry store and that he needed someone to come and work in this jewelry store, and would I be interested? And I thought, wow, just think, if I work in the jewelry store, I'll have my nights off, because we'll close that store probably at 6 o'clock. And besides that, I'll have Sundays off. And I looked at him and I said, yes. And he said, "What time can you be there today?" And so I told him, and so I showed up, and he showed me how to work the cash register. He showed me how to get the diamond ring sets out of the showcase window and put them in the safe. He showed me how to lock the door and how to unlock the door. He took me through all of these procedures. And then when it was time to go home, I basically took the diamonds out, put them away, locked the safe, went out the door, locked the door, etc. So he knew how I did all of that. And then he drove me home. And on the way home, he said, "You've worked for me for 4 hours. Do you feel secure enough that you could take care of my jewelry store if I'm gone for 7 work days?" Now, I was 16 years old, and I about fainted. And I said, "Do you think I can?" And he said, "Oh, that's not a problem. I've seen you work with customers. I know you can." And I said, "If you trust me, I guess I can try it." He put the keys in my hand as I was getting out of the car, and he drove away. Can you believe that?
That's amazing. Yes, I can believe it, Laree, because I know you and I knew Tom MacArthur. And again, we're talking about MacArthur Jewelers, which
Right.
is midway between Tabernacle and the Boulevard on Main Street, which is now, I believe, Forever Young
Yes.
Jewelers. That was the jewelry store in St. George. And you were running it, it sounds like.
I was there trying to. So I had been there for 2 days. So in walks this young man, and he's just this handsome dude. He's wearing Levi's, and he's wearing this knit white shirt, and he has his sleeves all rolled up, and he comes walking in. And I said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Oh, no." And he started coming around the counter. And I thought, whoa, I don't know. I said, "Wait, only employees come back here." And he nodded, and he just kept walking. So finally I said, "You come one step further, and I'm calling the police." And so he stopped, and he just grinned, and he said, "Look, I'm Tom MacArthur's cousin, and he asked me when I was up here if I would check on you and see if you were doing all right." And I said, "Oh, all right." So he sat down, and he watched me while I worked, and we talked. And the next day, he was there. He was there for 3 days because he was working at Titanium Metals in Henderson, so he was off for 3 days, and then he went back. Anyway, so that's how we met.
So this is Heber who came in.
This is Heber, okay? And at that time, he had graduated from Dixie College, and he was heading for the University of Utah.
What year would this have been, Laree?
Let's see. It would have been 1953. So he would go to school, and then he would come back for the Christmas break. And so he would help us during the Christmas rush. And then right after Christmas, we started inventory. Everything had to be inventoried by the first of the year, so that gave us 1 week. So we worked together as teams to do the inventory. So Heber and I always worked together. But that's how we really got to know each other. So when I was 18 and a half years old, and he'd take me home from work. So when I was 18 and a half years old, he invited me to go to the movies. And I was shocked because he just took me home, dropped me off, and that was that. And so we continued to date. And finally, I asked him on one of our dates, why did it take you so long to ask me on a date? We'd known each other for almost 3 years by this time. And he said, oh, why would I want to date you? All you ever did was giggle. But I guess he got over my giggling because I still giggle. But that's how we met.
My goodness.
And that's how the courtship went.
And so let's continue on as to how Heber became an educator, and then eventually you did as well.
He always was just a natural speaker, and he loved research. And he graduated from the University of Utah. He did his student teaching at Roosevelt Junior High School, and he had me go with him to his graduation. So I stayed with my dad in Salt Lake, and I attended all of the graduation events with him because his mother passed away. I never did know her when he was, I think, 18 years old. And his father wasn't able to travel. And so there was no one in his family to watch him graduate. So I went to his graduation, and that was really neat.
Now, Heber grew up in
Vail.
In Vail.
Yes. He was a Vail boy. And after he graduated, we got married. And then he got drafted. And so we basically spent 2 years in the military. And we were at Fort Lewis, Washington, those 2 years. And then when we were out of the military, Heber was hired at Delta High School. And so we spent a couple of years in Delta. Wonderful people, lovely place, colder than cold. Oh, my goodness. And so when Newell Fry offered Heber a teaching position at Woodward, he took it. And so in 1961, we returned to St. George. And he taught at Woodward and then at the new Dixie Junior High or Middle School, whatever you want to call it. And then he taught at Dixie High School. And then when Bob Slack was at the legislature, he taught at Dixie College, taking Bob's classes and teaching there.
There's 2 or 3 generations that remember him at Woodward, I being one of them. And what an impactful, I can't quite think of the right word, but an experience. To be in Heber Jones's class was an experience. And I remember how his enthusiasm, his passion for history really ignited something in me. And he taught me Utah history. I think I got Utah history in a way that only those who had Heber Jones's class got Utah history. And it was powerful and it was impactful, and it's still with me. And so I wanted to just share that because I think part of what we're talking about here is what teachers mean to us. And I'd love to have you, Laree, maybe take us through. I know you were married, you had a family, you raised a family, but eventually you became an educator yourself. Maybe you could take us through that story.
It was just a wonderful time. Heber loved teaching. He just was an actor, and so he made, I think, the people in history come to life. And we actually had 6 children. We had 4. We lost a baby, and so we raised 3. When the youngest, the third one, was 6 years old, we had 2 more children. And so it was like we had 2 families. And that worked out really well. That kept us young. Okay. We tried to take trips to historical places, and it was just so fun to have him as our guide because he would tell us all of the history from each of those historical places, and he made it come to life for his children and for me as well. I thought he was a great teacher. When they honored him many years later, I know one of the principals said, "What was the important thing about your teaching? What was it all about?" And he said, "It was all about my students." He said, "I really cared about my students." Now, he had a teaching load that was well over 200 students a year. That ranged anywhere from 229 to, I think, one year he had 260 students. But he knew every single one of them. And he really cared about each one. And what was always interesting was to go places with him after these students were raised, because so many of them would come up to him and say, "Oh, we wish we'd paid better attention. We wish we had listened better because you taught us so much, and there was a lot more we could have learned if we'd just paid attention," and things like that. So it was really fun, and he did care about his students.
And you, Laree, you were this amazing mom, raising amazing children. How did it evolve to where you became an educator as well?
When I had some college before we were married, and I had decided then that I wanted to be a teacher. And so it was always in the back of my mind to be a teacher. But the children came first, and I was not going to leave them until I had them in school. But I did take a few night classes. So I had a number of credits, all toward a degree in education. And Heber encouraged me to do this. And Heber was a strict father, but he was really a loving father also. And what was most important to us was that our children, number one, did well in school. And so they couldn't participate in athletics unless their grades were up. And they knew that. And so they strived to do that. And I went around and asked moms of successful children what they did. And it was interesting what they told us. Usually they said, when our kids come home from school, they have to do their homework. They don't play until their homework's done. And so that was something that we started incorporating. And then we had this fun time where we had VEO and could get to VEO when we wanted to as a change. And so deer hunt was always special. Hauling wood was always special. So we did a lot of family things. And that binded our children together. We always said that they had to go on missions. They were all boys. So they had to go on missions to please their mom. But they had to graduate from the university to please their dad. So they better do 2 of those if they did nothing else in this life. And so that's basically what they did. And we're so totally proud of them. We are just so proud of our sons. They're wonderful. But Heber, I would always help with events. For instance, I was a Cub Scout leader, and I was a Boy Scout leader, and the things that my sons were interested in, I wanted to be interested in. So I was a 4-H leader also. And Heber would say to me, "Why don't you just go to school and get your degree? You've got kids around here all the time that you're working with and teaching. Just go do it." But I had just a little bit more to do, about 4 semesters. And so finally, when our youngest son was about 12 years old, I thought, okay, it's time to go back. And so I went back to school and got my degree and did my student teaching at East Elementary, which was right across the street from where I live. It was wonderful, and I was hired there. And what was interesting is when Dar Smith hired me. Now, he was retiring, but he hired me ahead of time. And he said, Laree, I'm going to give you your choice. I need a first grade teacher, and I need a split 4th, 5th grade teacher. And I'm going to give you your choice of which you do. And I thought, so I talked to Hebrew and I said, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. What would you do? And he said, there's no question. He said, if I was given the choice, I'd take that split 4th, 5th. And so I did. And I had accelerated kids, and we just had a wonderful year. And the superintendent came down to observe me in my classroom, and I didn't know he was coming. And he was pretty pleased with what he saw all of the kids doing. And so he awarded me with the Sally Mae Outstanding First Year Teacher Award.
How old were you, Laree? Can you tell us?
I can, and I would be glad to. I was 51 years old when I walked into that classroom in 1988. So it just goes to prove you're never too old. Go do it.
How were you accepted among the other faculty members there? How did that all come together?
They were just wonderful. The thing of it was, my children had gone to East, so I knew them quite well. I had been asked if I would run for PTA president of East Elementary one year, and so I said, oh yeah, I didn't expect to get it, but I knew they needed to have some people to run. I ended up getting it. And so I came home from PTA meeting, and Heber said, have you got something to tell us? And I said, I'm afraid I have, because I was elected PTA president. And my oldest son was in the 3rd grade, and do you know what he did? He stomped his foot, and he said, oh, darn, why can't you be someone important like my room mother? And that did it. I spent a year as PTA president that year, but from then on, I spent all my time being a room mother because that was what my kids wanted. Isn't that fun?
That's awesome.
So I knew the faculty really well, and we just got along fine.
Who were some of those folks at that time?
Elaine Allred, if you remember Elaine.
I sure do.
That's Doug's wife, and Tanya Paxton, and Marilyn Guyman, and let me think, who was my team? Adele Wilson. Maybe you know her, maybe you don't, but she's been in the teaching career field for a very long time. Gerald Cox. Gerald Cox was just wonderful. Mr. Grimshaw. Did you know Mr. Grimshaw? Was he there when you were there?
No, but I remember the name.
Okay. Just great. And Dave Davies.
Yes?
Oh, wonderful person. All of these people. So I had great teammates.
And Smith was principal, but then he was retiring at that time.
He left.
And who replaced Star?
John Watcott. And John Watcott had been at the high school at Pineview. He was having some health issues, and he wanted to come. It was so funny. He wanted to get into a position that didn't take so much of his time. And so he took this principal of East Elementary, and he would laugh, and he would say, I thought it was going to be easier, but it's not. He was a wonderful principal, and I was the GT coordinator there for all of the years that I was there. And when I started my student teaching, they asked me to take this. And he is instrumental in getting the East Elementary Spirit Festival started. Because I went to him one year and I said, Mr. Walcott, what do you think this school needs? And he says, we need spirit. And so I said, okay, we'll just have a spirit festival. And we had this huge event in the Sun Bowl. All these elementary kids singing and dancing. It was just so fun and featured very well. And after that, we had a spirit festival every year, and they're still doing it. So Mr. Watcott was a great principal.
And Dixie Andrus, when did you connect with her?
Dixie Andrus, when John Watcott retired, we did our best to get Dixie Andrus. We loved that lady, and we wanted her to be our principal. And at that time, she was at the Woodward School, and she was vice principal, and we petitioned for her, and we got her, and we just had a wonderful time. She walks on water as far as we're concerned. Do you remember coming to East Elementary when we featured you?
Yes, I do.
That was so great, and that was so exciting for the class to know an author and a famous author that had gone to East Elementary. But that really meant a lot.
It meant a lot to me, and that was really a special day. I've been to a lot of schools and done a lot of different things, but that was the best ever.
We're glad. We were really happy to have you. And what it actually did, we started the kids writing their own books.
Uh-huh.
And so we did book publishing, and you kicked that all off for us.
All right.
And so we went back to the classroom and we said, okay, now he's an author. And look what he did. Do you think you could write your own book? And so it was really hard for the kids because they can do the first 2 pages of a story and then they're stumped. But my kids did ABC All About Me. And so they took each part of the alphabet, and we had something in their life that associated with that. Like A was your ancestors, tell us about your grandparents. And B was your birth, tell us about being born. And N was your name, tell us how you got your name. And so we put this all together in a book, and they did pictures for each of the books and to meet with the captions. And then we had those published. And then we had a publisher's tea and invited the parents, and they could come and see the child's book and everything. You started that.
I'm biased here because I'm an East Elementary graduate, and I have such a special place in my heart for that school. My teachers were a generation before you were there, but the whole idea and that sense of that school is really special in my mind. And I think of the time I was there as a kind of a golden age, but that must have really been a golden age of that school when you were there with Dixie Andrus as principal and Principal Watcott and all the great things that you did.
We really had a good time. And the faculty, this was interesting. When I became a district coordinator, I had to go to the various elementary schools. And you got a feel when you walked into each school, and especially when you neared the office, and you could tell whether there was harmony there and happiness there, or whether there was a little bit of contention. Always at East Elementary, there was harmony and there was happiness. That was a cohesive faculty that worked together, that wanted the best for the kids and had that utmost in their mind. Great school.
Now, sometimes we overstate this, but how much of that is tied to the Dixie spirit?
I think a lot of it, because our goals were to improve the students, to make sure they were happy, and to make sure that their needs were met. And that has always been the goal of the people of Dixie. Make sure that we raise good people, good examples, and make sure that they're happy and that they turn out to be quality people. So that it all just blends together. It just all works the same.
That's neat. And I'm sure that those same feelings and that same spirit existed at West Elementary and in Washington and in the little school at Santa Clara.
Yes.
And
at Sunset.
And Sunset and all the others that have come since.
You could feel that. You could just absolutely feel it. When I was coordinator also on the district level, I had to visit with all of these principals. And I want you to know every single one of those principals that I dealt with. And my jurisdiction was 4th grade through 9th grade. So I got the whole gamut. But every one of those principals I would have been delighted to work with. They were absolutely quality people and people that you would want to associate with and that you would want to develop friendships with. They were the best.
Laree, as we wind down here, perhaps you could just share some of your fondest memories in your career as an educator?
Oh, of course, I would say like Heber did, my students. My students, every year, you just bond to them. I just finished going to a kindergarten graduation, and I went there because my granddaughter is a kindergarten teacher. And to watch them and to watch those teachers work with those sweet little kids and how hard it is for them to let them go. It was really hard to let your students go and know that someone else was going to take them now and that you could no longer be as close to them as you had been. It was really difficult. And so I think the closeness with my students, those students that have passed away, break my heart. I miss them to this day. And the students that are still here, when they run up and say hi to me, it's just joyful. They age, but there's something about it. I'm not afraid to say, now tell me who you are. But eyes never change. So their eyes basically stay the same, although maybe their bodies and their hair change. But the students were the wonderful thing. And we hope that we gave them the best that we could. Our teachers worked and worked hard. I know I had an opportunity to become a manager at MacArthur Jewelers later on. And I thought, I can't do that. That's going to take 16 hours a day, or maybe 18, because you cannot manage something unless you've put that many hours into it. I know many teachers, including myself, that put that many hours into their day as a teacher.
There's a lot of sacrifice behind the scenes that we don't realize that teachers do. You embody all of my memories of my favorite teachers. I wish that I could have been one of your students. I just sense that love that you have and that commitment that you have and the talent and the gifts that you have. And those hundreds and hundreds of children who were blessed to be your students really are blessed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope that they know how much I love them and how much I care about them. And I'd always tell them, have a happy life. And I hope that they're out there, and I hope they're having a happy life.
Laree, you spent those years in the classroom with students, but then there came a time when you went on to the district level in a more administrative role. Talk about that transition.
I worked on my master's degree, and at that time, I was interested in accelerated learning, extended learning, and gifted and talented programs. The school district had brought in the program back in the late 70s and early 80s. They had received some federal money to help accelerated students, and so they wanted to spend on a district level. So I was asked to develop some programs for accelerated students. And so I would take them in the morning or after school, and that's when you could keep them after school. Now you can't. And we would do some different programs. And it worked out really well. We had a really fun, good time. So when I was working on my master's, I decided I might as well do a little jump forward and get my GT endorsement. And so I did that. The district had asked me, before I even went to teaching, to run their spelling bee on the district level, and so I did that. It was really a lot of fun, and we had some wonderful spelling beers, went to state. It was just great. So after I got my endorsement in GT, and the district found out about it, they asked me if I wanted to develop a few more programs. And so over the 16 years that I was the coordinator for the district, we brought on a number of accelerated programs. And these programs had to have a certain criteria or we didn't want to use them in the district. Number one, they had to have a national. So the student could participate in nationals if they chose to. So that was important. So we brought on, besides spelling bee, and there is a national spelling bee, we brought on next was History Fair, or National History Day. It has done very well. It starts in 4th grade, and it goes through high school. But we still are sending winners back to National History Day in Maryland. And it was my pleasure to go back for 16 years and judge those national competitions. And so it was really fun. So National History Day has been one of those things that we started. And even though I've been retired all of these years, it's still functioning. And then we had Karma Lang at West Elementary, who loved science. And she said, I've always wanted to have an elementary science fair where the children had to learn the scientific method, which would help them cope with any problem. And it does. So anyway, we got a committee together and we started the first elementary science fair west of the Mississippi River. And that science fair, I ran it for 16 years, but it's still going. So that's really great. And we brought in we had a big regional science fair, so we brought in schools from Beaver, Kanab, all over. And the university sponsored us, just like they did the history fair. So it just made it a great thing. So the kids learned the scientific method and got the feel of really doing a science fair project. And I'm delighted that event is still going on. And then we did Geography Challenge. We had a lingual boy who came in third place in the National Geography Bee. And so that got us really excited about geography. And we thought, we don't want to wait until middle school to start this geography thing. Why don't we start on a 4th grade level and a 5th grade level and a 6th grade level and tie it to the core curriculum? So 4th was Utah, 5th was U.S., and 6th was world. And we ran that for a number of years and had a wonderful time doing it. Had a student that I hadn't seen in 20 years come running up to me one time and he said, Mrs. J, do you remember that geography bee? I do, and I still know all the geography answers. So it was a great thing for the kids that were interested in geography to do. And then besides that, we had show choirs that would meet early in the morning and sing. And they would do that before school. So we decided that we needed to feature those teachers that were singing, teaching these children to sing early in the morning. So we developed a holiday of harmony. And we had that over in the Cox Auditorium for a while on the Dixie campus. And we outgrew that, and so we went to Tuacahn. And Tuacahn stage with all of these students singing was just wonderful. And they spent the day there. They had an opening song, they had a closing song, and then each school did their own number. It was really fun. So we did that one. And I'm sorry that's still not going, but it was delightful. And then we had a storytelling festival. It was a national level, and we actually sent kids to national with that one, too. But that was really good. And we had the 4 genres that the children could participate in. And then the City of St. George sponsored that. So they let us use the museum and the social hall and the opera house. And we ran all the different genres in that for all of the school district. And the mayor, bless his heart, would sign every certificate that we gave the students, plus paid for the medals that each one received. So that was really fun. And that event is still going on also.
So this Storytelling Festival?
Storytelling Festival.
And when does that occur?
We set these up so we had something just about every month because there were 9 of them. But it usually occurs in February.
And so students from throughout the district can participate?
Yes.
They start in their own school, or do they come to the district festival?
They start in their own school, and they have a storytelling festival in their school. And then if they're chosen as a winner, they're judged on their 4 criteria. And so there will be 4 winners in each school, 1 in each of the various genres. And then they go on to region. Or to district, I should say. And the District Storytelling Festival is held. Yeah.
That's great.
Isn't that fun?
That would be a fun one to step into.
And the kids are just delightful, and the stories that they choose are so fun. And then Science Olympiad is just a great competition, and it's a national one, and it has been going on for a number of years, and it's still up and running too. And they usually meet at Weber State University for their state competition, and they usually meet in Cedar City for their regional competition. So all these things are really fun. I've enjoyed doing them because for each of these events, you have to have a district committee. So the teachers that love these different topics would become a district committee, and they're just the best of friends. So we have friends that just, and these are lasting forever friends. We would start these competitions always with a training so that new teachers could always be trained if they chose to, and they would get credit for that. So I became an adjunct professor for Utah State University and for SUU, and I taught each one of these different events and how to produce them in your school and how to run them and how to bring the kids to district, region, and to state. So it was all just fun.
Laree, I can't help but think, just like this whole story that we've been telling through all of our podcast episodes about how here in Utah's Dixie, if something wasn't here or if something didn't exist here, we figured out a way for it to be here. And in that same spirit, you played such a key role in bringing all of these wonderful aspects of education to our district. It's just awesome to think how that spirit continues and how that ingenuity and that commitment and that we can do this spirit exists here.
It was just a delight. When you're a teacher, you're not in a classroom very long until you can pick out the various talents and the various interests that your students have. And it was my desire, and most teachers' desires, to meet those talents and to enlarge them and those interests and to make them more interesting. And so in order for the kids to participate in any of these things, we just called it brown bag. And 3 times a week at lunchtime, the kids would eat lunch, and then they had a 20-minute recess, right? So we would ask them if they were interested in participating in any of these programs. We didn't do them all at once. We had one brown bag event. For instance, with storytelling, I would say, if you're interested in storytelling and you'd like to be a storyteller, come into the library after lunch. And so that's how we started. We just took everyone that came. And then we told them what they had to do, how it was done. We had examples, and we did this for about a month. And then the kids chose whether they wanted to stay and give up that lunch recess or whether they wanted to go out and play. And that's how we got the groups, always. So it was just the kids that were interested and had the desire and wanted to continue. Isn't that fun?
That's really fun. That's really fun. Laree, this has been fun to visit with you. The spirit that you carry, the joy and the passion that you have for all of this is so great. And I just can't help but think how fortunate Utah's Dixie is that you moved here when you were 14 or 15 years old, and that Tom MacArthur got you in behind that counter, and that Heber Jones came to check and make sure you were doing okay there, and all that has come from all of that. Thank you, Laree. You're a treasure.
Thank you. This has been a delight. I just can't tell you how blessed I feel to have been able to live in Dixie around all these wonderful, good people. And the best this life has to offer, I know I have had. And so I couldn't ask for anything more. Thank you, Lyman.
Thank you, Laree.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Make your tax-deductible donation at docboothfoundation.org. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. The hot winds whirl around me and take away my breath. I've had the chills and fever till I'm nearly shook to death. All earthly tribulations are but a moment here. And oh, if I prove faithful, a righteous crown I'll wear. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. I hope that there's a heaven with rivers pure and clean. But I know that there are others who will come here after me. Though I may never see it as a garden lined with trees. If this desert's gonna